Hey, it's Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and it is Tuesday. It's May 17th. This will be our chart lesson for the day, and we had a little spike and channel up. It's a very flat channel. This is almost sideways, so you could really trade this in both directions when you had trends going up or down. We were looking for a measured move up here. We didn't quite make that. My guess is because we're in this flatter channel. The good thing is we're still trending up and we closed pretty close to the high of the day. So that's a positive. That's the way I'm going to look at it. But this is a really flat, almost sideways channel we got going on here. So nothing really to write home about. There's some trades in there, a lot of green ones. And it was kind of odd because most of your better trades were kind of in the middle of the day today, and the early morning and the late afternoon was kind of weak. So usually most of your best trades are early in the day, and we had some good movement here, but you just didn't get any good setup. So we'll go through them here and we'll talk about them. Let me just show you the daily chart real quick. This is the positive part. You can see we opened pretty much almost on the lows and closed on the very high today. So that's a good sign, and we're getting some follow through. So my expectation is that we're at least going to test this midline and maybe this previous support area, and we'll have to see if it acts as resistance or if prices will push through and pull back and test it and hold and go higher again. I'm really looking at a minimum for us to come back to these two locations to test this previous support and the midline there. And if we push through that, maybe we've made a bottom. We'll just have to see. It's just hard to say. This day started out looking good, then kind of looked like we might sell off, but I had a pretty good feeling this morning that we'd probably go higher today. That's what it felt like to me. There was a gap on today's chart. I'll show you that when we go back over there. And once prices filled that gap, they went a little lower. And but once they filled that gap, prices started trending higher again. And that's kind of what I expected. But let's flip back over and I'll show you the gap and we'll go through the trades. Okay, this dark blue line, that is the gap. That was the high from yesterday. You can see that was the high point yesterday, and the yellow is where we opened at 8:30. So the gap would be between that yellow line and where the high from yesterday was, and so that's the blue line. So that was your gap, and you can see we traded down, and we went a little bit further than that. Turns out there's a trend line down here, and that's where we were headed. You wouldn't know that at that point, so those two swings kind of set it. Then we confirmed it here, and then we went higher. So that's kind of a basic roadmap of how today went. We traded up here and left this gap. So when that gap occurred, prices wanted to fill that. And notice we came back and we tested the trend line and confirmed it here. And that's really like another test of this that gap too. And you can see that right across there. And from there we went higher. So let's zoom in. We'll go through the trades and we'll wrap this day up. And again, prices started out really slow today. So 7 o'clock came right in here as we're coming down. And somebody sent me their chart early this morning, and they had a second entry right here, and they took it, and of course it fails. But if you're reading this properly, you got a two-tiered channel working up here, and we had a big overshoot of it. Now, somebody will probably say, well, how do you know? And the reason this trader missed it is because they drew it like this. And that looks fine and dandy, but notice how we're not coming back to the midline right there. Notice how we do touch it right there, but if you drag it down here to where we're touching back here, and you can kind of see that looks like an overshoot, and that explains this move right here, bouncing up that midline before we go lower. And so it still keeps your trend line right here, but he also had a second entry right here where you can see I got a first entry, second entry right here, and then this makes a new high, and so that's just a first entry. So the charts are quite different, but I think his biggest problem was, if you're watching this video, is you just misread it. It's a little clearer on my chart, and you probably wouldn't have got tricked because there's no second entry there at the trend line like it was on your chart. But That's just the way it goes sometimes. I mean, you don't have to get these channels exactly right, but if you let's go back here. This is a good learning example. Let's say you did draw it the way he drew it, and let's say you did have a good signal bar and a second entry right here. Well, the very fact that we shot straight through the EMA and below it, and we're below his midline, your expectation, and if we did just come off the high, the expectations we're headed back to the trend line. That's the expectation, period. So entering right here is very suspect, especially in the middle of that channel. So, I mean, you got to go long right into the EMA, right into the trend line. Um, it's just not it's in the kind of in no man's land. So if you just wait till it gets back to here, then you probably don't get suckered into this trade. So anyway, I'm pretty sure this is where he entered right in here if I remember right. Or let's just say this was his second entry down here. It's still, look how everything's below the EMA. I'd want to at least see a higher low here working with this much down movement. I mean, we're in a little downtrend here, and I would look for that measured move. Notice you got one leg, and then you got almost a perfect measured move before it bounced. So that's another clue. None of those by themselves are great, but when you put them all together, this makes this very suspect. I mean, it's obvious on my chart you don't want to be going long there, but his chart was a little different. I give him credit there, but I think his biggest problem was he misread this, and it's my opinion that is what the channel looks like, and this is an overshoot which led to a reversal. A lot of times when you get an overshoot, you don't get a retest of the high. You just get a reversal. And that also led me to believe that, hey, once we were trying to fill this gap, if you know this gap's here, you're probably paying attention to that too, that we're probably going to fill it. And my expectation was that we were probably going to fill this gap and then try to make another leg up. And that's exactly how it played out in the end. Did I know that for sure? No. But if you, I mean, you can go back and look where I posted that this morning, and that was my expectation. And, you know, how do I know that? Just because I've done this for so long and watched charts, and I know how prices react. I know how prices move. Do I get it? Occasionally I say what I suspect, and it doesn't happen. So I'm not always right, but just something to think about there. You know, as you get experience, you'll start to see this stuff. But anyway, 7 o'clock comes right in there, and we're just chopping down. I don't see any reason to go short here because we're expecting a retest. And so you'd want to get some kind of trend going before you start going short. There's a reversal right here to the upside, but it's below the EMA, doesn't set up properly. We're just kind of chopping and stuck in this sideways stuff. You just don't want to enter in this stuff. You might look at that as a triple test, but there's not much room back to those highs right there. So, and we've been turning down there, so you really can't take that trade. If you got enough room there, maybe you take that. I didn't mark it, but there may be enough room there. It's a really big bar just to risk being able to go from here to the midline. It ends up going much further, but you don't know that. So, but it comes back up and it actually confirms the trend line here. And it breaks higher and turns down. I didn't mark this one. You might have entered this on an engulfing bar on a failed breakout. That's another possibility. But generally, you probably wait on the lower high, which comes here. And you can see we pushed on through there and pulled back. And so this is the low you're worried about, as long as you got room there. And then you get a failure here, and that really takes it straight on down. You can see they trapped some longs right there. Look how big that and fast that move was. That bar right there is 23 ticks, and then we went another, 8 or 10 ticks past that. So 30-something ticks there before we found some support and just kind of chopped sideways before going lower again. And there's no setup here to go short, so you just kind of have to watch this. And then, of course, we bounce. No setup to go long, and then we get a close outside the trend line here. The trend line's moved a little bit. Let's get this back in line. Now we got it. But you can see we bounced right off of it there and came back up. And we do get a close outside this time. And there's, I don't have it drawn on here, but there's a little trend channel working up, and you get a close outside new high. Unfortunately, you don't get a real good setup up here. Drops down, it comes back again, tries to go higher once, twice, and you also get a first entry, second entry. So that's a second entry short, a failed second entry long. Really nice signal bar. I like going long there. I'm sorry, short there. I marked that one green. It's a little bit questionable. We already have a break here, but we don't have a new low in place, and we haven't filled the gap. So there's a good chance this is probably going to be a nice trap right here, and you can see it drops on down pretty quickly. Sorry, I had a little interruption. I'm not going to answer it, but continues to drop. We do get a second entry here, but we can't trade that signal bar. Drops on down, drops, and we did fill the gap right here, but it just keeps on going. And come to find out, we had this trend line down here. You don't know that at this point, but you just have to stay with this channel until it's over. And then we get this reversal right here, which normally I'd tell you to ignore that, but with that trap that far away from the EMA, we're probably going to snap back at least to the EMA. But now we have a close and a new low. We've far surpassed filling the gap. Prices will at least come back to that EMA there most likely, and this thing just keeps working higher. And notice we get up here and just kind of chop sideways. There's no entries there. And then we come back to the trend line here, and I've traded this. It's a bounce right off that trend line, but I traded it as a failed breakout there, and a nice signal bar right off the key entry point. And that does confirm that key entry point. And from there we get this short-term channel. It just works straight up. I don't see any other entries in here that you really can take. But we come up here to the high side of the channel, and then we turn down. We bounce, and we're just going sideways. So again, I don't see any trades in here that I like that you could risk until we drop back down here and we bounce once, and then we kind of confirm that trend line and get a there's a second entry long there, a double bottom, plenty of room back to the EMA, and then you get the reversal right here, and failed second entry short. And so I like that entry, and prices just take off. And I didn't mark this one, but really, and the reason is because you're kind of back in the channel, and it could have reestablished itself for that little congestion area. But technically, this is a double bottom, but that does look like a leg up and a pullback. Even though it makes a double bottom, you could count that as a leg. But you could say, hey, this is a double bottom, and that looks like two legs up, so a failure right there when that broke above. So that's a possibility. My problem is it was right back into that resistance, and it was still holding. And so it makes it a little questionable to go long there. So I'll just give that one a green one. I'm not crazy about it. And there is another little spike in channel. I didn't mark it because there's not really anything else going on here. And you can see we're working up. We get a break, two legs to a new high, and then we're trending down. Just nothing I see here that I really like. And nothing going short. You might say there's a failed second entry long right there, but there's just so much sideways action, and we didn't quite make it to the high here, so it's just really hard to know what prices are doing. They do come back and bounce right off the trend line, and you get a little bit overshoot, but I think you need a higher low or something here, and you just don't get a setup for that. And we're running up, and then we're chopping sideways again. And then finally you get a break of this green channel. You get a higher low right here, so if it breaks above that, we're probably going higher. Probably try to make a new high. So I like that trade. It is right into the EMA, but if it breaks above right there, you're going to probably get a scalp out of that fairly easy. And you can see they had the shorts trap because this thing, look at that big bar, it just rockets straight up, and you get a really nice. And we finally make that new high there. So you get the break, the new high, and then you're working lower, and you get a reversal right there. I like that one. And you can see you're really getting some selling coming in here now. This thing drops down, And you actually get a second entry right there. I didn't mark that one either, but it does confirm that trend line, and it is a second entry, and that's a decent bar. My concern was you had a little trend working up there, but a lot of times if you get a good setup, you can disregard that trend channel because the bigger channel will probably override it. And you can see it did, but it shot down and came right back. So you wouldn't have got stopped out because it went lower even yet again. But I didn't mark that. I should have at least marked it green, but you can even mark that red. The better trade is to wait on this. You've got your breaking new high now, and that's really a triple top across there, triple test. But then you get a lower high here too, so I like that one as well. So you got multiple opportunities to enter that, and you can see on that reversal, the bottom just falls out of it then. We run down here, we bounce again right off the trend line, no setup there, no high or low, but you do get a reversal here, and I really thought this one would play out well. And there's actually a second entry long there too. I didn't mark that one because it looks a little congested by the end. When this didn't take off, that's a concern. But there is a second entry long there, and so you'll probably get a scalp out of it. But when it failed real quickly, I liked going short there. Again, it's a little bit congested, so I just made that green. I didn't make it red. I mean, this is where you can get chopped up, where I'm always talking about when you get in that sideways stuff and then you get a second entry, it fails, then you get a failure and it fails. And so you got to be really careful with those. Past this failed second entry short here, I think you're probably better off just ignore that. And of course, it does end up making a higher low. It makes a higher low here, but again, it's right into that resistance. I think it's too risky. It would have worked, but you don't know that in advance, and it will fail on you. And we take off. I don't see any entries up here until finally you get a first entry, second entry, and that's the first break of that blue, so you're probably going to retest the highs. Then you get a higher low here. If you didn't enter on the engulfing bar, I wouldn't enter that because it's definitely congestive looking. And when this didn't take off right away, there's a good chance it's not going to take off, even though it did. The trend's gotten pretty strong here, so something else to think about, but I'm just not crazy about that one. And then, of course, you get a first entry and a second entry. This didn't make a equal low. I still mark this. It's only like a tick difference, and really the bodies are what you're looking at there. I mark this as a second entry long because of the congestion, and it's just a good signal bar off the lows. But technically, this is your signal bar, so I'm fudging a little bit there, and you really don't want to do that unless you're a really good chart reader. And even then, you can see I made it green because I wasn't sure about it either, but I did mark it just so I could talk about it. And if you took it, I wouldn't push you too hard to say that was a bad choice because it is a second entry, and you did have a failure there, so you got a double test of that level. So it's something to. But mainly I marked it green so I wouldn't forget to talk about it. A lot of times I'll draw an arrow at those, but I just went ahead and marked it green. And then we come back and we make a test here. It doesn't break higher, but then it makes another test. And the only reason I didn't make this one blue is because there is some congestion there, and we already tried to get through that midpoint once and didn't. But this is a somewhat higher low and a little better signal bar. And we did push higher, so as long as you got room to get out there, maybe you take that trade. We're probably going back to the highs, but it's still a little bit aggressive, so I only marked it green. And that takes us into 230. So interesting day. Still, even though we had a mostly upward bias today, it still was not an easy trading day because it still has that range type feel. And we're still above and below the EMA and flipping directions back and forth. And that's why you could trade this both ways today. And somebody will probably ask me about this 1 o'clock p.m. Fed chair speaker. Whenever you see these speakers, it's not like an FOMC announcement where there's going to be a rate hike announced. These guys speak all the time, and they'll mark it red, because there's always a chance they say something that that triggers the market or spooks the market or the market likes, but that's rare. And even if they are going to do that, these are usually luncheons, and they're speaking during right after the luncheon or whatever. And you don't know when in that speech they're going to say something, so you really can't pay any attention to that 1 o'clock. Just be aware that those guys are speaking, and if something crazy starts happening, maybe you exit your trade. But most of the time, you can ignore those guys when you hear when you see the speakers, and they'll always make them red because it is the Fed, and people live and die by their words because they have so much control over interest rates and the economy as a whole. So you got to pay attention to them, but I don't put a lot of stock in those speakers. So you just can't, because you don't know if they're going to say anything, and even if you do, you don't know when they're going to say it, and it's not going to be right at 1 o'clock because that's just when they start speaking, and that's assuming they start speaking on time. Then it might be 30 minutes into their talk before they say anything that would trigger the market. So just don't pay. I mean, be aware of it, but don't put a lot of stock into those. It's not like the rate hike, the FOMC rate hike announcements. And a lot of times people think they're the same, they're very similar, but they're not. So anyway, that's what I saw today. Again, it looks real positive on the daily chart here. We opened pretty much on the low and closed almost on the high, and we are inside the yellow and green bands now. So my expectation is we're at least headed to test this support resistance area and maybe the midline, and maybe we'll get some traction and go higher here. That's my hope. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. Keep this one a little shorter than the one yesterday, but there was a lot going on, and I got a couple of emails, people saying they could hear my frustration and so forth. And if I sounded frustrated, I apologize. I probably was a little frustrated because I just get overwhelmed sometimes by emails, and so just try to be reasonable with your emails. I don't mind answering an email, but when the same people send me 4 or 5 a day, or even 4 or 5 a week, it just I get over 100 emails a day, and just trading question related, and that's the reason I created the forum. So I do encourage you to go to the forum and ask those questions. And if there's something that's just stumping you, you can send me an email, but please just do it in moderation. That's all I ask. And I really wasn't complaining. I mean, I love what I do, and I love doing this. And some days I have bad days and get frustrated, especially if days I feel overwhelmed. And I think yesterday was just one of those days because it was a tough trading day, and people were just emailing me left and right. And it's just a hard trading day yesterday. And today's not much easier because even though there was a steady uptrend, it was still a lot of up and down, sideways type action. So it made the day hard as well. So there's going to be days like that. And there's going to be days that are just, you think, man, this was so easy today. And that's what trips people up. They don't quite understand that it was real easy because it was a strong trend, or it was real hard because it was very choppy and there was no direction, and and just by the time they started to feel comfortable, the direction would change. And you're not good enough chart reader to really see those differences, and you just think you had a bad day one day and you had a good day another day. But the truth of the matter is, one day was a really easy trend day and the other day was a real tough choppy day. And that's the reason you had more luck one day than the other, because trends are easier to trade. You can't, if it's a good strong trend, you can't hardly mess it up. You just get long at the trend line and hang on for dear life. And it's hard to mess them up. Sure, yeah, you can still get it wrong, but it's harder to get it wrong as long as you're trading with a trend. But when you get the days that it's up and down and it's inconsistent where it turns each time, it just makes it really hard. So anyway, I'm not getting back on my soapbox today. And again, I apologize if I seemed frustrated yesterday, because I was, but I don't ever want to come across that way. And it's just one of those days where the market was tough, and I felt overwhelmed with all the emails and trying to keep up and other things going on in my life as well. So, but anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. We'll be back again to do it tomorrow. Hope you had a better day today and a better one tomorrow, but just keep working on it. This doesn't come easy. This is not something you're going to read a manual or book and learn overnight. It's hard work. It's like learning a foreign language. You got to immerse yourself in it, study it, and practice it every day. and just keep chugging. And that's how you get better at this. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. We'll be back again to do it tomorrow. I'm done for today. This is Mac with PriceActionTradingSystem.com, and we'll see you next time.